Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial As One's interview series called Belonging. And you know, I say this every week, I'm really impressed with the guest who we've got, but even more so, the fact that we've got a live studio audience. So guys, can you just make yourself known? All right. And this week, Belonging is our 100th guest for Belonging. So many of the people who are sat in the audience have been on the other side of the camera or on the other side of the interview, and I just want to say a really big thank you for that. But at the same time, I want to just introduce our 100th guest, and that is Professor Waljit Dhillo. And he is a professor of endocrinology, and he works here at Imperial College. He's got a very impressive CV, which we're going to go into as we go through our discussion. And guys, as is our usual custom, we're going to have the discussion, but if you've got any questions, there's a Padlet. I haven't actually set it up, but we have set it up. If you want to have a look at the Padlet, you can put your questions on there and they will come through to us. And also, put your hands up, let us know. That's the easiest one, you're here. So there will be a roving microphone and you can ask your questions towards the end. Right, so, Waljit, it's fantastic having you. You are not only our 100th guest, but you are our first live in-person guest as well. So, no pressure.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
But I just want to say a big thank you and just start off with my usual question, which is, when we're talking about belonging, it always has a kind of like an origin story. So from our perspective, or from your perspective, how did you develop your sense of belonging as you were growing up? What was the influences which helped you to gain your sense of identity and belonging?
Yeah, so thanks, Ed, and thanks for the invitation, and great to see people live, because I've not enjoyed the last 2 years of online. So I was born in a small town called Bedford, which is about 50 miles from London. Quite a nice place, I'd call it, as in a bit boring. My parents migrated from India in about the 60s, so they'd been here for about 5 or 6 years. And so I guess when I started out in early childhood, and I guess say 4 or 5 when you start school, I'm from an Asian background. I think you might spot that. I'm Sikh, you might spot that. And then, you know, there's more diversity, obviously, in different parts of the country. That part of the country, slightly less. Not too bad, there was some Asian community, but so you're an Asian child, essentially, in the UK. I was born in the UK, so I guess more belonging than somebody who hadn't been born here and came much later. But equally, there's most people around you that don't look like you.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I started, and then you kind of then obviously go through school, and then I obviously went to medical school, graduated as a doctor, and then I guess it's that transition of where do you feel that you are part of the furniture rather than this person in this kind of strange environment.
So if we start off by looking at that kind of like the early childhood, being kind of like, were there many Asian families in the community where you were growing up? And how did you feel about, did you realize that you were different, or was that not a perception?
Yeah, so I think, you know, I'm now 52, so going back quite a while. There was obviously less diversity at that point.
Yeah.
So there were some families from an Asian background in the community, but I guess by the time you start school, you're you know, in the minority.
Yeah.
So and when you look round as a child, you know, you look different to the rest. So
yeah.
So you know, whatever, you know, and I think we're obviously much more aware of other people, other beliefs, etc., etc. Whereas I think when you're 5 and you look different from most of the other kids in the class, that belonging is, well, I was born here, so, but I look different to the others in the class. Yeah. So I guess there's a tension there, and you know, it's in the back of your mind.
Mm-hmm. But you excelled at school. Did you enjoy school? What was the not motivation, but what was the messages that you were getting from your parents about what education could potentially do for you?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. So if you say what are the big factors that got me to where I've got, the first one would be the parents.
Yeah.
So my dad came from the north of India, Sikhs have traditionally owned land and do farming. So he didn't go to school. He went to school for a bit, but couldn't write Punjabi. Certainly couldn't read or write English.
Right.
And could speak, kind of pidgin English. And that was until he passed away.
Yeah.
So that was the kind of background there. My mum was, very similar, although she was educated to kind of about 16 and then had to look after her sick mum.
Right.
So neither of them were obviously from an educated background.
Yeah.
But they did know that an education would get you somewhere.
Right.
So I guess that was, and then the other thing is work ethic. So my dad worked in the same job lifting 20,000 bricks manually for 45 years. And he couldn't progress because he couldn't become a manager or and he would have got those posts, but he wasn't educated. So so that's kind of kind of what I do now is frankly quite easy compared to that. It's a different job, but it's not physically the same as picking up those bricks for 45 years and doing the same thing. So, that kind of work ethic and the education is a way out if they didn't want me to do that. So I had that continual support all the way through.
So you put it as support there. What you didn't feel it was pressure; it was support.
No,
they wanted you.
So what they wanted was me to do well, but also be happy. Those were the two criteria.
Right.
That was all the way through.
Right.
Which is great.
So supportive, and they wanted your overall well-being.
Yeah.
And they recognised that the kind of jobs which they currently have, I'm not going to say you could do better, but they wanted you to aspire higher.
Yeah, because they're hard.
Yeah.
I mean, that was, it was, I wouldn't fancy the thought of doing that job for 45 years. So, and doing the same thing. So he didn't he couldn't progress at all. So, so that was quite, and like you say, it could be a pressure, but actually I didn't perceive it as that because of, they were very nurturing and wanted me to be successful, but also very, happy.
Yeah. So at school then, when you were in the classroom, was there any perception or how did you view yourself within the class? How did you get on academically? Clearly you must have been quite good.
Yeah, so I enjoyed sports, and obviously I did well at school, but I did feel different. And I guess you come, and there was much more racism then than there is now. And I guess you kind of, at some point, say, this is either going to break me or it's going to make me.
Right.
And I thought, I'm going to get there.
What was it that's kind of like...
I'm trying to think. Well, I mean, I'm sure most people in the room have experienced people calling you names, etc. And I think one of them I remember when I was about 12, cycling to school, and kind of, somebody said one of those names, and I thought, I'm going to show you.
Right. Yeah. So subconsciously, even though it may not have, it was, you knew that it was almost though that someone was making you feel different, and you were going to say, well, actually, I can achieve not just what you can, but beyond.
Yeah. It was almost motivating in a way.
Right. Okay.
On the background of that support at home, and
So what, I'm just thinking about the teachers. Were they supportive? Did they recognise your potential?
Yeah. No, I mean, the schools were great. Teachers were supportive.
Yeah.
So I think from that aspect, but equally, if you're in an environment where other people are, the environment, you feel different, and you could easily go the other way and say, well, this is a system that's not going to work for me.
Yeah.
So, I'll walk away from the system and not achieve.
Yeah.
So that was another option that I think people sometimes go down, or even for a few years, and then you've kind of, you've got behind. So.
Yeah. So for you, your motivation was, I need to get to the next stage. Yeah. I am capable of doing it.
Yeah.
You had the support of your family. Yeah. You had the support of your teachers. Yeah. Your friends, the friendship group as well?
I mean, the friendship group, your close friendship group will always be supportive, you'd hope. But it's the bigger community that you're part of is where, a lot of the racism will come from. So.
Right. So you got to medical school. Was
Yeah.
was that a sea change for you?
Yeah.
How
I think once you're in a university environment, you're in a different environment to the rest of the population.
yeah.
And it's always been more diverse, more supportive. So I think that was a complete sea change in terms of, there's unconscious bias, and there still is unconscious bias, but I didn't really see what I'd seen kind of growing up from university upwards. And of course, obviously, once you graduate, you have stature, you're in a job, you're in the NHS. So I guess you're seeing different you're not seeing the rest of society,
Right.
You're still going to go to an odd event and, and there'll be, a racist comment or something else. But in the environment, say, from 18, 20 plus,
Yeah.
it's been, a much nicer environment and much more belonging.
Right, okay. I'm going to just step back slightly,
Sure.
because there was one question which I should have asked, but I forgot at the time. What was it that made you decide to do medicine?
So I could either do science or sports. I was rubbish at kind of the social sciences. So that was quite easy. So the sciences I was good at and just found easy. So that was kind of... And then my brother's a type 1 diabetic. So
Right.
I guess that kind of made me think, yeah, this is pretty cool.
So there was also kind of like then a family connection, which kind of like helped spur you on to...
So he got diabetes when he was 11.
Right.
And so I had kind of interaction with healthcare and, how amazing it was.
So do you think that was part of what helped your decision-making process to say that you wanted to become a doctor?
Yeah,
Because
because I had done something scientific. I couldn't do anything or sports.
Yeah.
I wasn't good enough at sports,
Right,
unfortunately.
okay.
I was quite good at football and cricket. But, on a more kind of, it wasn't going to be an international kind of thing. So.
Yeah.
So that made it easier, actually. So I knew probably, after about, because he got diabetes when he was 11, I was good at science, and then you start thinking about what you need to do, and I thought, this is a pretty cool career.
Right.
But at that point, I was going to be a GP, because the only doctors I knew was general practice.
Yeah.
And I thought that would be an amazing career.
Right. So role models, because you're, as you've said already, your parents, we can't say that they had connections to an old boys network or anything like that. So where did you get your role models from?
You pick them up along the way, I guess. So I went to medical school, and I was going to be a GP, as I said. I trained at Barts, which is in East London, and I really enjoyed physiology and biochemistry, which might sound a bit odd to some people. But I really enjoyed those subjects, and endocrinology was really strong at Barts. So, and some of the very senior professors were in endocrinology. So that kind of veered me towards that. But when I qualified, I was still going to be a general practitioner.
Right.
So that was kind of first role models of where I might be going.
Right. So
Interest.
So it was a passion, or not a passion, but you were good at those subjects. You found them interesting. The fact that it was almost like potentially, not saying it was curative for your brother, but there was another close family tie to it, would also have a major influence. But then you still say that you were looking down the route of going to general practice. How did that change so that you're not a general practitioner, you're an endocrinologist? What happened? How did you get from there?
So I think this is an important one. So as well as my Imperial hat, I'm Dean of the NHR Academy, so it's a training role for the country, for the National Institute of Health Research, for their training budget, and I've always done quite a lot for training at Imperial, because I think a really important factor is bringing through the next generation. And the critical thing for me, where I wouldn't be sitting here now, it was an intercalated BSc.
Right.
So for medicine, you do 2 years basic science, 3 years clinical, and then you can do an extra year as a BSc. So I thought that's quite good, because instead of doing 3 years, you do 1 year and get a BSc. It sounds pretty cool. But you obviously have to do another year, and you have to pay for it. So I decided at year 2, and I guess that's the other thing, I was quite strategic all the way through. So I don't know why, but I guess I've been quite grown up all the way through. I decided at year 2, I'm not going to do a BSc, because my parents wouldn't be able to afford it. They would have sold the sofa and supported me, but I thought it was too much, and I won't do it. So I did well in year 1 and 2, and the Medical Research Council at that point used to fund 1-year BScs. So because of the background I was from, I came top of the year in physiology in years 1 and 2, so they gave me a scholarship.
Fantastic.
So from there, I got a first. I got the prize for the best BSc in the specialty, but I was still going to be a GP.
Yeah.
But that set me up with a taster of research. And actually, when I later then decided that I wanted to do endocrinology, it opens doors that otherwise wouldn't be there because you wouldn't have that background.
Yeah, yeah. So for you, the scholarship was a key factor to your progression.
Yeah.
Without
paid fees,
paid fees,
stipend.
and paid stipend.
Yeah.
So without that, the trajectory could have been
The trajectory would have been because I wouldn't have been competitive later on once I decided to do endocrinology for a Wellcome Trust Fellowship because I would have had no background. Right. That would have been fair.
Yeah.
But it's kind of very relevant to today.
Yeah.
When there's 4 medical schools in the UK that do an integrated BSc, the rest is optional. And if you're from a low middle income family, you're probably not going to spend another 20k doing an extra year. Yeah. What's the point? That was my.
Yeah.
So I think there's some really important points in your career that would mean, even if I suddenly decided I wanted to do research, I wouldn't have had the background.
Yeah, yeah. So that was quite pivotal.
Yep.
Strategic, but pivotal. Yeah. If the opportunity.
Well, it was strategic, but I wasn't going to do it had I not got the
opportunity.
You know what I mean? So had I, okay, obviously I did well, and I got the scholarship. But had I not, I wouldn't be here. So don't move.
All right. Okay. So leading on from that, then.
Yep.
So, but your trajectory was still saying, "I'm going to be a GP." Mm-hmm. That was still the trajectory. Where did that switch come? And explain, kind of like, just for our audience, a little bit about what it is that you've done scientifically, if that's okay.
So I qualified, and you're going to do 2 years kind of general training, and I thought I'll do kind of medicine. So to be a general practitioner, you need to do 2 years at that time and then 3 years training. But I thought, actually, to be a really good GP, you want to do the medical exams, the MRCP, which are quite tough, and you learn it, at a kind of bigger level. So when I started kind of doing that, I thought, actually, endocrinology is pretty interesting. And one of the consultants said, I thought you were interested in diabetes endocrinology. I said I was, and he said, "You're a good chap. We can't fix it like the old days, but you should definitely apply for the job." And so you've got to impress people along the way. Yeah. But he kind of said, "Look, you should think about it." And I thought, well, actually, all right, then maybe I'll think about it. So, to cut a long story short, I got a registrar post in diabetes endocrinology, but again, I was still going to do the endocrinology, not be an academic. Yeah. And then. Again, being strategic, I was thinking, actually, if I'm going to do well and do a job that's interesting and varied, you need to do a PhD. Yeah. So that's when I kind of thought, okay, so I need to go and find a supervisor. And I guess the next big strategic thing for me was Hammersmith, because I did an SHO job there, was the person who mentored me probably for the last 20 years, which is Steve Bloom. Right. What do you think Steve Bloom saw in you? So, Steve is colourblind, which is the first thing. He doesn't give a monkey's about what colour you're from. He doesn't give a monkey's where you're from. What he does care about is excellence and hard work. So, and obviously it goes, and again, he wasn't at the time, he was a professor, but he wasn't knighted, and he's now got his FRS. So, I had that level of person who, but he saw my CV, which had a first and lots of prizes on. Yeah. So from his point of view, this is quite a good person to have in his lab. Right, okay. So, it was a kind of quid pro quo. It goes back to that BSc. Had I had a standard CV, he would have said, look, you're not going to be competitive, and he would have been right. Yeah. So then, I kind of, he supported me in my Wellcome Trust Fellowship application. I got that. And actually, I got an MRC scholarship and the Wellcome Trust at the same time, so I had to give one up. And then did my PhD with him, and then I thought, that's great. I really enjoyed this, but I'm going to go back to being a full-time clinician. So, there's that dichotomy between being a clinician and being a full-time scientist. Yeah. How did what was the factors which then helped in your decision-making process? Yeah, so the next thing was 2 weeks or 3 weeks after going back to the wards, and I won't bore you with the science, because I'm sure you all love endocrinology, but there was a patient on the wards who we were going to take their adrenal glands out because she had ectopic ACTH syndrome. It kind of chimed with something I'd done in the lab, and I said we were going to take them out before any research question came into my head. So, but her adrenal glands were going to come out, so I took them back to the lab and we, did some endocrinology on them, and I published a paper, and I thought, actually, I quite like this science stuff.
Right, I'm going to just put a little caveat here now. Ethics nowadays, that wouldn't be happening, right? So just saying that, it's not going to happen.
This was A, her adrenals were going to come out, and B, consented. So, that's why I said that at the beginning.
But it was the start of something.
That was the start. That was really the start where I thought, yeah, this is really cool. And that, again, goes back to the research experience, because I didn't know what a clinical academic is. What is a clinical academic?
Yeah.
And actually, it's just somebody who does research, teaching, and clinical.
Yeah.
But I didn't see that or understand that or anything else.
Yeah.
So, and then the next step was I was at Ealing Hospital with, my son had orbital cellulitis, so I was having IV antibiotics, and I was sleeping on the floor for a couple of days. And Steve phoned me up and said, there's a grant call in a couple of weeks' time, you should go for it. I was like, okay then. And I did, and I got the next fellowship. And I guess that was the big transition where I thought, yeah, this is actually quite a cool career. I can do research, teaching, and clinical.
And all three aspects were appealing to you?
Yeah, I could have easily been a full-time clinician. I enjoyed teaching, I enjoyed the clinical, and then I was new to research, but I enjoyed that. So yeah. I'd have been quite happy being a had no problems, and they're fantastic, great, they get a chair. But actually, this person's not quite so good on paper in terms of outputs. But actually, where have they cut? What's their background in terms of they've also had full maternity leaves, and they've had an elderly care. And we're putting that even in the fellowship applications form now. So we're starting to try and look at, and as we go, and as we kind of try to judge people who are even from different backgrounds professionally, it becomes even more difficult. But you're trying to then say, well, actually, what is their potential for what the research opportunities they've had? And I think if we do that, we will start having people from more diverse backgrounds and actually better outputs. Because, I'd have been lost to the system if I hadn't been given those research opportunities. So I think not just thinking, in that single-minded way is important.
Brilliant. There's another question just here.
Thank you, Professor. It's been great listening to you. You spoke about some of the people that helped you along your way.
Yeah.
Where's your younger self in your as a mentor to other people? Have you got a succession plan of people? Because in my experience, where ethnic minority groups fail, we don't have a succession plan. It's you're the best that we've got.
Yeah.
And then you move on and there's no one else. So is there a talent pipeline that you've identified, regardless of their background, someone who's just different from the norm?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really good question, and that's the reason I've been involved in training. And that's more broadly. It hasn't just been, developing people from an ethnic background or underprivileged background or whatever. And actually, that's something we haven't talked about is it's not just gender, it's not just ethnicity, it's money. Money talks. So, but in terms of the specific point you make, so in my research team, that's exactly what I'm trying to set up. So one of the people is an Untitled clinician scientist. He's from Syria originally, I think. So my team has got. So again, because Steve's being colourblind, I'm obviously going to be colourblind. I don't give a monkeys who comes along. They just need to be excellent. And then supporting them through. So in my team, there's Ali's now an Untitled clinician scientist at clinical senior lecturer level, and we'll be moving up. And Shivani Misra is somebody who I'm mentoring. I had a call with her yesterday. So when I took over as head of division, I started talking to her. And she's fantastic, but was doing 13 things at once. So I said, get your papers, get your grant, and everything else will follow. And she's just got a Wellcome Trust Fellowship for £1 million and about to be appointed as a clinical senior lecturer. So I think it's important that all of us, actually, it's not just people in the room, that everybody is trying to support the next generation of researchers. And if we pick them fairly based on criteria of potential, we will get a diverse mix. But I think we can't just do more of the same. You have to be proactive.
Hands are flying up all over the place now. Yes, and then Crystal afterwards. That's right, come on, you've got the mic, sir.
Thank
and
you.
Krista will go afterwards.
How do you balance the power you can have as someone who's like the minority in that leadership position with the cost of being the only minority in a leadership position?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question, bro.
How do you balance the power that you can have as being like the only one who could speak to the experience of other people who aren't represented in leadership versus the cost of being the only person who can speak to them?
That's it. That's an interesting one. Yeah. So I think for me, at the level I'm at now, I'm kind of going, well, actually, at 60, do I want to kind of take retirement and chill out a bit? Right? So, I do feel a pressure actually now, I didn't before, of kind of saying, well, should I be going for a VC of a university in 5 years' time? I don't know.
Yeah.
But actually, well, no, but do I want to? What I'm saying is for myself, if I want to, yeah. But what I'm saying is, do I want to? And then there's that, as you say, there's almost a pressure of, well, surely I should be for the community, but so it's almost like a personal sacrifice, isn't it? But up until now, I've just done what I've enjoyed, and I completely enjoy what I'm doing now. And I guess that goes back to why sometimes you don't take that next thing, because if things are going well, you think, well, they might not go so well if I do this. But I mean, it's a good question. And I think there is, as we start talking about EDI, one of the things with Athena Swan, some female academics were spoken to at other places and said it was brilliant. For others, it was a disaster for me, because I was sitting on EDI committees all the time. So I think actually as universities and trusts, it shouldn't be us in the room that are only doing EDI, it's everybody's business. Otherwise, all of us in the room will be doing nothing other than EDI. And that's not good.
Yeah.
Having said that, I think we've all got a responsibility to shout and make things better. So.
Excellent. Crystal's got a question.
Yeah, thank you. I'm trying to resolve two things that I think are coming out of hearing your story.
Yeah.
So without wanting to put words in your mouth, it
Sure.
sounds like you have been excellent throughout your career. And certainly there's a common understanding of minorities that you kind of need to be excellent in order to be successful, right? You need to be far better than everyone else.
Yep.
And so certainly that seems to have been your case going through. And I'm wondering how then, I believe you said that you have mixed feelings perhaps about quotas, right?
Yep.
And so how do we resolve
Yep.
this necessity to be excellent?
Yep.
And then kind of what you're saying about wanting to look at the full applicant, which almost necessarily has within it the acknowledgement that some are not as excellent. And what is propelling you to make any sort of intervention if on the one hand there's this excellent and on the other hand there's
So, I mean, it's a really good question, and I don't think there's a right answer, and everybody will come up. So the easiest way is to have quotas, and you say, right, this is what we're going to do. The problem you have with that is...
It's me again, sorry.
You should know how to do this. The problem you have with that is, and I'll give you an example, so the research professorships, which are the top of the NHR fellowships, Chris Whitty, when he came in, there was only male, so you can only go for that scheme if a university nominates you, and 2 people get nominated, and it was only men being nominated. So he came in and said, if you want to nominate 2 people at Imperial, one of them has to be male. If you want to nominate a second one, they have to be female. And it instantly, overnight, changed the ratio. But it doesn't make any difference when you get to the next stage. But that made a transition. But those women who were successful and have done amazingly well in that first round, and one of them got an OBE this year, were told by their institution, by other men, well, you only got it because you're female. And one of the conversations, that I had with the early career researchers on my NHR role was exactly that. People were saying, I don't want to be the token person, I want to get it on merit. The challenge we've got is how do we get rid of that unconscious bias in the room when people are judging CVs? And the first thing for that, when I took over the dean role last year, was we've got 8% of people from ethnic minority background on our fellowships. I mean, they put me through, but that's not what people should be looking at. And somebody in the audience said to one of the program directors, when I come to the next NHR fellowship panel, can I expect there to be something other than not just white, men and women? So the gender we've got right on our panels is 50-50 now. I think this one, has worked. We need to continue that. But we've got a big job to do. And if you don't have the people on the panels with diversity, you're not going to, we all appoint our own. that's kind of the unconscious bias. You can't get rid of the unconscious bias. And so you absolutely have to have diversity on the fellowship panels. So that quota, in fact, we were having a discussion yesterday. We're going for 7% disability. We're going to go for, this is not confirmed yet, I'll add, but we're kind of thinking about 7% disability on our panels, 20% from ethnic minority background and gender balance. So if you start having that, you start making the right decisions. And then it's what things you put in place to get people from different backgrounds into the room, because that's the next biggest challenge. People aren't going to apply if they don't know. So for medicine, there's a group called Melanin Medics. I kind of found out about, there you go. I went to their conference 2 weeks ago as Dean of the NHR Academy to say, you guys need to be applying for our fellowships. So they're a group of doctors from Black African background, and one of the people who set it up is a junior doctor herself, but she set it up because of her experience as a medical school, and now there's 700 doctors that kind of get together, 250 are interested in research, and we're going to be working with them to try and pull people through. And I think what you can do is have things like internships and early career research opportunities, which I benefit from, so that people can get to the top and be competitive. So it's a tough environment out there in terms of getting grants for anybody. So if people are appointed but they're not of the right caliber, then you're setting people up for failure, and I don't think that's the right thing to do. But I take your point. It's a real challenge to do. But I don't think we should be doing things quickly. I think we should be going for a long-term fix.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you, Professor. I'm wondering what your thinking on the word inclusion is. I coach a number of young people, most of whom are of ethnic minority,
yeah.
and that whole imposter syndrome
yeah.
comes up time and again.
Yeah.
And they're bright young individuals.
Yeah.
Also, you get past the diversity, because that's easy to prove, as you say, a wider palette. You then go to the equality, and we start to talk about pay and access and whatever it is. But then we get to the inclusion piece, and I think it's often forgotten. I'd like to hear your take on that.
So what do you mean by inclusion? Sorry.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is exactly my question.
Yeah.
How do we make these environments inclusive so that people do not find a ceiling, even if there's not, or even if there is? And I mean, I have my own views about unconscious bias and how much of it is bias, conscious bias as opposed to unconscious. But the word inclusion, I think we often forget it. And people, and it's easy to prove the first two. You just say, well, look at what we do here.
I think it's a good point, yeah. I mean, I think if you haven't got diversity all the way through to the top, then you're not going to have that inclusion, are you? So if you're in a room and there's nobody that looks like you, even if, I mean, there is a culture as well of committees or meetings or places that you're in of, are people, do you feel when you go into that room as included as, somebody from a different background? But I also do think that actually if you haven't got people that look like you right at the top, then that is going to be, as I said, when I was 5, I go to school and most people don't look like me. So how do you then feel included? But some of that is a cultural thing as well, isn't it? I'm interested in talking to you afterwards.
Well, I've been in a room with people who don't look like me.
Yeah.
And I felt included.
Right. So how did they do that?
People who look like me,
Yeah.
I felt
Excluded. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a bigger discussion.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Guys, you're touching on some real good points. I see hands are going up left, right, and center. I've got 1 and 2. Go ahead.
Hello, Waljit. I haven't seen you in a long time. Mine is not a question. Mine is more praise. I like to praise people while they're still alive and when they're not dead. So I'm giving you your flowers today. So I worked with Waljit for over 3 to 4 years, and one thing I'd say about Professor Dhillo is that he's dedicated, hard-working. But the thing that I always admired about Waljit was that he was a person that questioned the status quo. And if there's one thing I'd want everyone to take away from this session today, is challenge the status quo. I say this now as I work for a charity, I work for Shelter, and I'm the head of their anti-racism program. And one of the things we implore people to do now is challenge the status quo. Don't be quiet, be outspoken, speak your truth. And I think that's something that Waljit has always done in the time that I've known him. So, as I said, I'd implore all of you to do that as something while you're at Imperial, so that people can see the change. If you want change to happen, you have to be the change, and you're only going to be doing that if you're outspoken and question that status quo that are the gatekeepers here at Imperial.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Thanks. Hi, Professor. Thank you. Really, really interesting talk. Thank you for your insights. Is this on? I wanted to pick up on some of the tensions that I am hearing. You talked about quotas, which we know are illegal in this country, but positive action isn't.
Yep.
And we've spoken about inclusion, diversity, terminology, discourses, which I also think is interesting. I wanted to go back, and I'm not sure if a question came up earlier about the colour blindness point that you made, and I heard it a couple of times where you were saying that someone essentially advocated for you and they didn't care what colour you looked like. You also spoke about your story, the origins, you know, being the sons of two Sikh parents and how hard they worked and their work ethic and the cultural values and the wealth that they brought with them to the UK that was instilled in you.
Yeah.
So I want to then suggest that colour is important, and actually to take a colour-blind approach is to miss out all of that wealth and value that you need in order to speak the truth to power that the brother upstairs spoke about, because that can be career limiting for a lot of people, and the ceiling is not so much their own excellence, but being aware of the fact that it could be career limiting for you when you speak truth to power, so you go along to get along, and it's less about the excellence, it's more about the cultural environment. So I just wanted you to say a bit more about this idea of colour blindness, because it's a response I hear a lot of the time from people in possessions of power. Colour doesn't matter, and there is meritocracy. But actually, I heard you speak later on about talking about who's in the room, who's in the space. And I'm not so sure that we all employ our own, because the evidence around bias is sometimes that we don't. Some people do that we don't. So I just wondered if you could just say a bit more about your take on colour.
And I think it's a good point. So clearly it isn't colourblind, because why am I sitting here and why are we having this meeting? Because we've got a lot of work to do, and we've only just started on that journey. So I think it's a positive journey, because 5 years ago we weren't having any conversations. So I think it's great that we're starting, but I think you're right that so I guess that for me, the opportunities I've had, I would want everybody else to have the same. And then you might make it or you might not, but at least it's a fair race. So my 100 metres, I think I started on the same line as everybody else, and then I got there, and other people, and I might not got there through my own lack of ability. But if everybody's got the same opportunity, it's equality of opportunity, I think, is the critical bit. And I've had those, clearly I've worked hard and all the rest of it, but other people do as well, but unless somebody's going to support you in that system. So, and Kareem and Steve, who I mentioned, have spent 30 years in getting, our unit inclusive and, not from an EDI angle, just get the best people in. That was their motto, and support people. So we get the best registrars at middle grade, where there's vacancies everywhere else. Lots of people applying and lots of people, but you've got to mentor those people, There's one fellow who's, wrote the applications last year, failed at both, and then supported her through it. She's got an MRC clinical training fellowship. So, I think it's, the colourblind hopefully would be there, but it clearly isn't, because there isn't the numbers at the top. But that's where we need to be getting to, that everybody's in the same boat. And it's hard for everybody, but it isn't harder for some people.
Just if I could just say one final point,
Yeah.
just to be clear though, what I'm saying is that what you bring to the table,
Yeah.
who you are,
Yeah.
your identity,
Yeah.
is added value.
Sure.
And often our starting point is
Yeah.
that for a lot of our students and our colleagues, that they don't bring anything. That
Yeah.
cultural wealth doesn't count for something.
Yeah.
So that person, as you said, who was on the hospital floor with his son, I think
Yeah.
you said,
Yeah.
who was bringing to bear all those cultural memory, those stories, that work ethic, that is adding value. So maybe you might not have been first in that
Yeah.
exam, maybe you
Yeah.
came 10th.
Yeah.
But actually, what you had to do to get to be 10th might far
Sure.
outweigh the person
Yeah.
who's first. So I'm not so sure you
Yeah.
were at the same starting line as everybody else. The fact that you came and kicked butt and beat everybody else speaks to you more than the other people at the same place.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's a good point.
I think I'm going to take my final question, right? And that's going to go to Pei. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. That was an excellent overview of your experience. I think it's a bit of a follow-up from the last question, actually. I think we all know that the way academics are judged for their performance in terms of excellence is flawed. You know, counting papers, journal metrics, and all that. So, do you think it should be changed to include lived experience, added value? And because, you know, as someone with a different lived experience, that affects how well they publish papers, the people they surround themselves with, whether or not they have the right mentors around them, know all the trapdoors and all the windows. As you said, you went through a journey where you only found out certain things like what a clinical academic is, what you know, mentorships you can get and stuff like that as you went along, because you just sort of bumped into those situations. So when evaluating academic performance, should we also, in applications for fellowships or whatever, have a section about lived experience and really take that in when we judge how well someone has worked, how far they have jumped from where they started?
Yeah, so it's a really good point. So one of the things we've done for the NHR fellowship panels is next to the CV of where you've trained and how many grants you brought in and the papers, next to that, not the end of the form where nobody reads it, is a mitigating box of what are the things that have held you up from publishing or getting on and the amount of research experience you've had. So that's kind of a start in the right direction. It still puts the onus back on the person, and we did worry about that when we put it in, but we thought, again, we can't just do nothing. If we do nothing, that's worse. And I saw it in action, and this was not ethnicity. This was somebody who was a dietitian who hadn't published quite as well, actually. I was thinking, she's got to the interview stage. But actually, then you read the box and it says she'd mainly worked in the private sector, she's got 2 children, we've got mum with dementia she's caring for, and that came through. So the chair pulled that out at the interview. I don't know if she got funded or not, but she was in the room. So it is difficult, and, you know, another thing is the figures for disability are apparently 4.5%. The real figures for disability will be 20%. So, you know, actually, if we try and get data, we know historically that data's been used against people, and so people are nervous about it. And actually, then what's your background and where did you come from and what was the household income? Some people, you know, and it goes back to, you know, because people have historically had that data used against them, they're actually quite nervous about revealing that data. And then, you know, sexuality, people are nervous about revealing that data. So it is difficult, but I think it's a journey, and we definitely need to be looking at where has this person come from. So this morning we've just done a probation review, and the person got through, and we were kind of saying, well, these are the pros and cons, but she's also had a maternity leave, she, you know, has been COVID. And actually, if you take that into account, so if you just take it on those metrics, we'd probably have said come back in a year or two, because it's not, but actually it was fine, because if you take those extenuating circumstances, you know, then that person will now be at Imperial, tenured, and do amazingly well. And if we just took the metrics, they wouldn't be here, and we need them.
Fantastic. Final question, right? Because people are going to say, Wayne, you're ill-disciplined.
Just very briefly, but to build on that last question, which was very good and very relevant, and to build on your answer, I mean, there is quite a lot of work going on in rethinking and developing more holistic approaches to evaluating research and researchers. So I'm actually chair of an organization called DORA, the Declaration on Research Assessment, of which Imperial is a signatory. And one of the things we advocate that is coming in, I see it in a lot of funders, is the use of narrative CVs, in which allows people not just to tell the story about their research and why they think it's important, but, you know, how good they are at mentoring people. You said that, that's obviously a really important attribute of academics. And my experience with various funders like the ERC and various others is that, you know, those personal stories and personal circumstances people are much more aware and much more likely to take account of it now. So it is, you know, I think practice is definitely becoming much more inclusive. If I can tack on a little question, your point about leadership I thought was really, really important. I think it's a set of skills that I'm afraid academics, and I speak as an academic, too too readily discount.
Yep.
And I just wondered, at what stage in your career did you get the leadership training? Would it have benefited you to have it earlier? And how did it really change the way you do things?
Yeah, so I got it when I got my clinician scientist, which was post-PhD, and I think that's probably the right level. Because during your PhD, you just need to get on, but once you're starting to lead people, I guess, is the right level. And sorry, what was the other bit of the question?
So how did it direct you? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So I think it prepares you for how you deal with people. So it goes back to the point that was made earlier. You know, how do we look at people? So, you know, somebody's child's ill. Well, I need the study doing. I need the clinic running. Well, actually, they're an individual. And I think one of the things that we do badly is talk about workforce. Nobody in the room is workforce. We're all workforce, but we're not. We're individuals, and we come to work, and we've got life outside. And you don't know what happened this morning. You know, I've had a row with my wife. I didn't actually, but it was okay. But you know, and we kind of, it makes you think very differently, and makes you more tolerant. And the elephant in the room conversations, I'm much better with those because you know you get taught how to do that. So you know, you're going to have an elephant in the room conversation. You should go in and have it, not just sit there for 45 minutes talking about the weather. So I think it, in terms, and I think just because you can publish 10 papers in Nature doesn't make you a great leader. It makes you a good scientist, but it doesn't make you a great leader. So I think people who are going to lead do need some leadership training, and actually the ones, and I say this as somebody who was very skeptical about it, you know, because you think it's a waste of time. But actually, once I started that journey, you know, it was incredibly valuable. And I think they do help with the imposter syndrome as well, because they say, why are you not going for this post? It might be the right thing to do. But you know, it's self-reflection, I think, and just making you think about things much more. I think the other thing I would just add is you need a personal advisor. And the person who's been my personal advisor all the way through and made me make some terrible decisions I may have made was my wife. So she's not medic, but I go and discuss the things, and I was like, I'm going to go and email Wayne and do this. You know, I'm a bit calmer now, but... And then she'd go, and I said, you know, do you agree? And she'd go, no. And I wouldn't send the email. Then Wayne wouldn't be so upset. But, you know, it's actually a really valid point of you need to go a sounding board when you're going to make some decisions. She is now very bored because she's not a scientist at all. But so most of the time she doesn't listen to me now. But, you know, you do need somebody outside of your close circle saying, what do you think about this situation?
Guys, Waljit, I want to say a really big thank you. Can we, since we are... This is what I imagine happens at the end of all of my interviews, that there's this big round. It's just that I don't hear it, that's all. But it's been really fantastic having you as our 100th guest.
Thanks for inviting me.
No, it really has lived up to the expectation. And there was many factors which you were saying, which I felt to myself, there's a fair few lessons I could learn from that. And that's what I hope that throughout this whole, the other 99, I'm not saying that you guys didn't, because every single Belonging episode, there is so much lessons to be learnt. And that's one of the reasons why I think we've got to 100 and why we are marking that today. And I'm looking across the sea of our audience, and I'm seeing virtually 99% of the people who are here are former guests who have come to see us in person. So it's really wonderful. Before we go into the next stage, I'm just going to do two things. Let you know who's going to be our guest next week. This is the normal format. So we've got Dr. Christina. Dr. Christina. It's been one of those mornings. And she's working as a haematologist at Hammersmith Hospital, but she's also involved with working with sickle cell and has started a project called the Invisible Warriors, which is really a fantastic project in helping to gain understanding of what's going on. Now, at this point, what I was going to do was, okay, if you haven't, now you guys, if you haven't seen your own you can find it on there, right? but if you haven't seen someone else in the room who you're seeing for the first time or the second time, then you can go and probably find their interview on there as well. Okay, so that's at our YouTube channel, which is tinyurl.com/belonging. And, this is where I go into a little bit of there is a little article which has been published about belonging. I don't know why they've got my face up there, right? Because the story's about you guys, right? But if you want to find out about our candid conversations, either click the link or use the QR code. And that goes into some of the stories. Now, if you don't see your story in the article, it doesn't mean that I didn't think your story was good. I'm just putting a qualifier in there, right? But I could only select one or two, and there have been some really powerful stories that we've had throughout the time. So if you want to have a look at that, then please do. I'm just going to spend no more than 5 minutes. I'm not even going to show the video clips, which I spent half the night working on. I'm not going to show any of those because we are here and we can have a really good conversation together. And what I want to do is I want to make sure we go out and we can mingle together. Is that all right? I saw Sunday, he does this every single week, man. When I'm just about to do something, Sunday puts his hand up. And you know what? I can't resist. Sunday, what is it that you wanted to say, my friend? See, I knew that was what Sunday's question was. We will see. I'm not sure yet. I'll have to clone myself first, and then. Well, but I know we've got some really excellent interviewers in here, so we'll see what happens. Okay. But have a look at that. That's kind of like a story of belonging. But I just wanted to. Waljit, yours is there. But these are all the faces. And I wanted to just reflect on all of the different individuals who have contributed their stories to this belonging project. And I see so many of them here today, which I think, ideally what I'd like to do, if it's not too much, is all of our guests, we come and we stand down the bottom here and we take a selfie with the pictures at the top, and right? Because this, I think, is a really momentous occasion that we're able to have shared the stories of so many individuals. And they are your stories, but they're our stories. And that's the thing that I want us to take away from the belonging, is that there isn't any I, it's we. And it isn't any me, it's us. We are the story of belonging. We choose whether or not we allow people to belong, but we also choose whether we want to belong. There was something which Waljit had said earlier on, which was that when somebody asked him about, well, I've never seen any Sikh professors. And he said, well, actually, I'm a Sikh, but I am also a professor. The two can be totally separate from each other, and we can find our existence and our identity, our belonging, from a totally different sphere than the one that we're in, which can sometimes be what helps us to overcome some of those challenges that we may be experiencing in our current line of work. But I don't want to look necessarily on what's challenging us today. I want us to celebrate, but be mindful that it starts from within. I already told, I don't know if you've looked at all of the titles which I give, but I've already worked on a title for Waljit's, and I said it to him the other day, which was equality of opportunities. Because I think what Waljit's story really highlighted to me was the fact that he was given space. And he was given space to excel and to extend. Not everybody is given that space. And so their opportunity and their ability to actually excel is hindered. So what I would like us to do going forward is to try to give people that equality of opportunity. So those individuals, going back to Pay's question, where you're talking about excellence, but at the same time, you recognize that in order for you to meet those metrics, you're going to need some additional support. So let's give them that additional support. And don't crack them over their head and say, why aren't you getting up to this standard when you haven't given me any of the tools to enable me to do it? I'm going to get off my soapbox now, all right, and just say another really big thank you to everyone. I'm going to invite the audience to come to the front. We'll take a selfie, and then we're going to go and get something to eat. But Waljit, thank you for being our 100th guest. You guys, thank you for coming. One final thing. This really is the final thing. It's not about Wayne. Really, it's not about Wayne. It's about Imperial As One, who have worked with me tirelessly throughout this time. So I'm going to give some name drops right now. Right? Omar was my doorman. Right? Until Omar left and went off to another employment, Omar was here every single week. He was on the doors, metaphorically, because it was on Zoom, but he was my doorman, right? Pay has come on board, and she has been absolutely fantastic in organizing and helping to get the calendar, making sure that we've always got a guest. Originally, guys, this was only meant to be once a month, and it turned out from once a month to once a week. And Pay has been really instrumental in... We've got a number of comms people in our team. So Sarah and Des are the co-chairs of Imperial As One. Sarah is a tweeting machine, and she just sends out the tweets. It's starting, and Des will send one on Teams and say, it's just started, guys, and then everybody will be running in to join up. So without them, the support wouldn't be there. So, and then, and all the committee members, Crystal, Nikita, Margaret. Where's Margaret? She's always running off when I'm giving her, right? So Margaret, Manjula, so many people have really worked so tirelessly hard. Clarissa, right? All of them have worked so hard to make this the product that it is, and giving advice and everything like that. So I just really want to say a big, big thank you to everyone. And to the regulars who, I see your names come up every week, who are there tuning in. She didn't know I was going to do this. Sophia, she's there every week, and she tunes in, and she asks a couple of questions, not too many, but she asks the questions. But it's good to have people who are supportive. And for everyone, please come to the front. Let's take our photo. And Moon Lee, where is she?